It was supposed to be a simple dinner, the kind we'd had every year. White tablecloth, dim lights, my parents sitting across from me, like always. My mom wore pearls. My dad ordered the same scotch. I even brought flowers. And then, somewhere between the roasted duck and dessert, my father set down his glass, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You know, there's a chance. We're not actually your biological parents," just like that. Like he was commenting on the weather. My mom didn't deny it. She just bit her lip as if the truth was something sour on her tongue. They said it had been on their minds, that they weren't sure anymore, that maybe I came from someone else, someone who painted someone named Elias. I stared at them, barely breathing. Not because I was adopted, but because they waited 27 years to tell me. And when they did, they served it with steak and sympathy, like it was supposed to go down easy. But I didn't swallow it. I choked on it. And I stood up, napkin in hand, and said, "If I'm not your daughter now, was I ever? Or was I just a placeholder? You kept polished like your antiques, pretty to look at, but never really yours." They said I was being dramatic. But what do you call it? When the people who raised you loved you supposedly wake up one day and decide your blood matters more than your whole damn life with them. My name is Elowin, and this is a story of how I found out I might not be theirs and how I made sure they'd never forget what I am. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just comment, listen below, or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far this story can reach. If this hurts your heart even a little, please subscribe to this channel. It's how I know I'm not screaming into the void. Thank you. And now, here's my story. My name is Elowin Harper. I'm 27, and I've spent nearly all those years living inside a museum. Well, not exactly. But Langley's Antiques and Art, the gallery my family owns in Concord, New Hampshire, has always felt more like a curated memory than a business. I was raised by Theodore and Clara Langley, two revered names in the antiquities world. Our gallery sits in an old federal-style building on Main Street, its floors creaking under the weight of centuries-old furniture, the scent of varnish woven into the walls. Sunlight filters through tall windows, warming oil paintings from the 1800s. It feels like a time capsule, timeless, unmoving. People admire the Langleys. They see a family steeped in elegance, discipline, culture. And from the outside, that's what we are. But growing up inside that pristine perfection teaches you one thing early. Nothing in a gallery is ever touched without gloves. I love them, Theodore and Clara. I respect them. But I've never called them Mom and Dad. They've never insisted either. Ours is a kind of closeness you walk around, not through. We share breakfasts with linen napkins and talk about market valuations over dinner. Love here is quiet, managed. There's a small oil painting Theodore gave me when I was 6. It's of a foggy shoreline with a barely there silhouette of a child standing by the water. He once told me, "This reminded me of you, soft, watchful, on the edge of something bigger." I've kept it in every room I've lived in. It's not signed, but somehow it feels like a part of me. Lately, though, the air in the gallery has changed. It started subtly. Theodore began making odd comments out of place, even for him. "Don't expect to live inside these walls forever," he said one afternoon, watching me catalog a late 19th century armchair. "This place. It's not meant to hold you forever." I laughed, unsure if it was a joke. He didn't. Clara's been distracted too. I asked her about a photograph. I found an old image of me as a toddler at the gallery's first public opening. She barely glanced at it. "Oh, those years blur together," she murmured, then turned back to her emails. I watched her shoulders stiffen. But the sharpest crack came from the presence of a man named Silas Ward. I've known Silas most of my life. Once a close associate of Theodore's in the auction world, he vanished from our circle after rumors about questionable dealings. Now, he was back, showing up for meetings, slipping into the gallery during closed hours, whispering in corners. I caught Theodore with him one afternoon, their voices low, urgent. When they saw me, Silas smiled too fast. Theodore's face went blank. And still, I said nothing. I didn't want to believe the unease blooming inside me. But everything changed the day I entered Theodore's private office to grab a folder. He didn't hear me knock. He was at his desk, hunched over a worn envelope, stamped Private Adoption Services. When he saw me, he jolted and quickly shoved the documents into a drawer. He didn't explain. I didn't ask. But something inside me shifted out of orbit. That night, I told Jasper. He's been my friend since college, our gallery's best art restorer, and one of the few people who speaks plainly to me. I told him everything, the comments, the tension, the envelope. He frowned, then tried to laugh it off. Maybe they're stressed about money, he said. Or just aging. He didn't get it. I walked home through the gallery's back hall, past gilded mirrors and porcelain clocks, past memories encased in dustless glass. And there it was, a pocket watch behind thick crystal. It had stopped at 4:18. I stared at it for a long, long time. Some things stopped running, I thought, but they're still displayed, still polished, still pretending they work. Theodore and Clara invited me to dinner that Friday. The Common Man, our town's charming old staple with its stone fireplace and iron lanterns, seemed an odd choice. To celebrate 20 years working together, they said. It sounded more like a business milestone than a family occasion, but I agreed. Clara looked beautiful, as always. Perfect hair, pearl earrings, posture stiff like a sculpture. But she kept sipping her water too quickly, smiling too hard. Something was off. After the main course, Theodore set his fork down with a metallic clink. Then came the sentence that cracked my world. We may not be your biological parents, Elowen. We adopted you. But lately, I'm not so sure where you came from. Time slowed. The room kept buzzing, but I stopped hearing. Clara's hands trembled as she placed her napkin on her lap. She didn't deny it. She didn't speak. Theodore continued as if this were a casual update. Silas mentioned someone, an artist we knew years ago. He claimed the man once left a child with a private agency, around the time we adopted you. It got me wondering. And then, as if that weren't enough, he chuckled. Actually chuckled. If you ever get famous or wealthy, we'll be more than happy to claim you officially. I stood quiet, stiff. I didn't shout, didn't cry. I just walked out, heart unraveling, in silence. That night, I sat in the gallery's archives. Behind me, velvet-lined cabinets held priceless heirlooms. In front of me, my life felt counterfeit. I pressed my hands against a cherrywood display, once proud of it. Now I felt like I belonged inside it. Labeled, questioned, curated. The next morning, I stayed home. But Jasper attended the antique auction in Hanover. That afternoon, he texted me. Silas just made a joke. If Elowen sells something worth $1 million, will you finally admit she's yours? Theodore laughed and said, if she gets rich, I'll call her daughter every day. I read it 3 times. My hands shook. I went to the deepest room in the archive where no one goes. And for the first time in years, I cried. Not from confusion, not from fear, from humiliation. 2 days later, Fiona called. I hadn't spoken to Theodore's sister in months. We need to talk, she said, her voice low. We met at a cafe in Portsmouth. Quiet and warm, the kind with old books stacked near the windows. She didn't waste time. Your father. He's been obsessed with a man named Elias Marrow, a painter. He used to sell work through Langley's years ago. Died young, had no family. Rumor was he left a daughter behind. Silas mentioned him to Theodore, and it stuck. I didn't speak. My coffee sat untouched. I once saw one of Elias's paintings, she continued. A young girl near the water. Looked exactly like the painting Theodore gave you as a child. I should have said something then, but I didn't think it mattered. Now I realize silence is its own kind of betrayal. I left the cafe with my head spinning. My name Harper was borrowed. My face, perhaps painted before I ever knew it. Was I a Langley? Was I a Marrow? Or was I just a well-dressed mystery passed from one name to another? I stared into the black swirl of my coffee, stirred it until it spun into a whirlpool. Everything inside me felt the same, spiraling, unmixing, refusing to settle. And that was the moment I realized my story had never been mine. It had always been their exhibit, their curation. But I was about to rewrite the labels. A week had passed since that dinner, and I still hadn't stepped foot in the gallery. I told Clara I needed time, and Theodore didn't call. I spent most of my days walking the quieter edges of Concord, my nights buried under old letters and silence. But something kept gnawing at me, not just the possibility of a different father, not even the humiliation from Theodore's as so-called joke. It was the shape of a figure, circling in the periphery. Silas Ward. Then late one evening, my phone lit up. An unknown number. No name, just a single line. I didn't mean to hurt you, but you deserve to know that your role in all of this isn't as simple as you think. Below the message were two initials, AC. It took me hours to remember where I'd seen those letters. Amara Cole, a junior associate hired into Langley's team only months ago. I'd seen her in meetings, quiet, composed, always, with a notebook and a listening face. We'd never exchanged more than pleasantries, but something about the message felt urgent enough to ignore formality. We met at a small breakfast spot tucked behind the post office. She arrived early, sat in the corner away from the windows. Her eyes flicked to mine as I approached, nervous but steady. I'm sorry, she began without waiting. I know this is strange, but I couldn't sit with it anymore. I let her speak. She told me she had studied Elias Marrow during her graduate work, a troubled but brilliant painter from New England, whose work had recently been reevaluated by collectors. In her thesis, she'd written a speculative connection between Elias and an unnamed child mentioned in correspondence from his final years. She'd shared parts of it with Silas during an art history conference. Back then, she said, he seemed genuinely curious. Only later, after she joined Langley's, did she begin to realize Silas had used her information to stir suspicion in Theodore. He pieced together timelines, cherry-picked quotes, inflated implications, and then he went further. He told me Amara said quietly that Theodore was preparing to transition the gallery, that maybe you weren't interested anymore, that I should be ready to step into something bigger. Her voice broke slightly. I believed him. She reached into her bag and slid a printed email across the table. I scanned it quickly. Silas had forwarded Theodore a message claiming it came from a now defunct adoption agency. The note suggested that Elias Marrow had once relinquished a daughter to Concord in 1998. I was born in 1997, I said flatly. I know, she nodded. It doesn't add up. I checked twice. He altered the year. A wave of nausea crept over me, not because of the forgery, but because I could already picture Theodore's hands trembling as he read it, because I knew how powerful even the suggestion of doubt could be. Amara looked up, her expression heavy. I don't know what his endgame is, but it's not just about you. He's doing something with the gallery too, whispering things about restructuring, outside buyers. I finished my coffee in silence, unsure whether to thank her or scream. But something inside me had changed. The confusion was still there, but it had shape now. And that shape had Silas's fingerprints all over it. I stood, leaving a tip, and looked down at her. You don't need to feel guilty, I said. You were just another brushstroke in his painting. That evening, I packed my bag, not to run, but to return to the gallery I didn't want reconciliation. I wanted answers. I wanted Theodore to look me in the eye and tell me whether he'd been tricked or whether he had chosen willingly to believe the lie. Because one is betrayal, the other is abandonment. And I wasn't sure which hurt worse. The invitation arrived from Fiona the next day, handwritten on thick ivory cardstock, as if formality could disguise tension. A family dinner. Portsmouth. Please come, she had scrawled below her signature. It's time. I debated throwing it away, but something pulled me there. I arrived late. Everyone else was already seated in her dining room, a modest space lined with bookshelves and framed concert posters from Fiona's youth. Theodore sat stiffly across from Clara. Elliot leaned against the wall, arms folded. Silas wore a navy blazer, smiling like the world owed him applause. I walked in, placed my old painting, the one Theodore gave me at 6, directly in the center of the table, and took my seat. Fiona opened the evening with a calm forcefulness. I think it's time we stop pretending and say what we mean. Theodore's eyes flicked toward mine. They no longer held amusement, only something between shame and fear. Clara didn't speak. She stared at the tablecloth like it might swallow her. I didn't wait. Do you honestly believe I'm some orphan who wandered into your lives by coincidence? Or do you just need me to be someone else so you don't have to face what you lost? Theodore closed his eyes, breathing through his nose. When he spoke, his voice was brittle. There was a painting, he said. One of Elias's, A Girl by the Ocean. The resemblance, it was uncanny. I didn't want to believe it at first, but then Silas started, connecting dots. He paused. We lost a child, he continued. A daughter. In 1996. Clara never really recovered. When you came to us, I felt fate, maybe. But when Silas brought up Elias, part of me started wondering and fearing. Because if you weren't ours, if you were his, maybe you'd leave. Clara finally broke. Her voice barely carried. I knew, she said. Not everything, but I knew he doubted. I didn't say anything because I was terrified. Terrified I'd lose both of you. Every time I looked at you, I thanked whatever God I believed in that you were here, but I was never brave enough to tell the truth. Silas leaned back in his chair, smug. I simply asked questions he offered. If those questions caused instability, perhaps the foundation wasn't strong to begin with. Fiona stood, walked to the kitchen counter, and returned with a folder. She placed it on the table and opened it. This is Silas's employment record from Boston, she said. He was terminated after manipulating sale prices and artificially inflating valuations for galleries he wanted to absorb. Sound familiar? She turned to Theodore. He approached you recently about selling part of Langley's. Didn't he promise you security? Legacy. The room fell into stunned silence. Don't blame me for wanting to protect your business, Silas muttered. You're the ones clinging to sentiment. And then Elliot spoke. I don't need DNA to call her my sister, he said quietly. But if the price of protecting this gallery means handing it to someone like him, then we've already lost something far more valuable than blood. For the first time, I felt something crack, not in anger, but in relief. Elliot had been quiet through all of this, watching. But he'd never stopped seeing me. I reached into my coat and pulled out the letter I'd written 2 days before. I hadn't intended to read it, but now it seemed the only language that fit. I used to think I was just another piece. In your collection, I read aloud, polished, placed, occasionally admired. But I've come to understand that I'm more than provenance. I am not a mystery to be solved. I am not a painting to be claimed. I am not yours or his. I am mine. I left the letter on the table and walked out. Behind me, my painting sat in silence. A child by the sea, watching, waiting, becoming. I drove through the fading gold of afternoon light. Silence crowding the car like mist. The roads wound through the white mountains, past birch trees and weathered fences, toward a place I hadn't been since I was a child. There had been summer trips here, once years ago. Theodore searching for antique clocks and barometers in forgotten barns, Clara taking notes, and me in the back seat sketching strangers I saw through the window. Now, I was alone. No destination but distance. In the passenger seat beside me sat a battered canvas bag. Inside the oil painting Theodore had given me at 6'3" yellowing letters from Clara, written when I was still learning to read, and a small silver bracelet engraved with the initials E.H. I hadn't worn it in years, but for some reason, I slipped it onto my wrist before I left Concord. It felt foreign and familiar all at once, like everything else in my life. The inn was small, old, and tucked between pine trees and gray rock. The walls smelled faintly of ash and pine cleaner. My room had a cracked window pane and a quilt stitched with faded stars. It was the perfect place to unravel quietly. I spent the first evening doing nothing but lying on the bed, listening to the wind scrape against the glass. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. I kept imagining myself as one of the antiques in the Langley showroom, polished, admired, but untethered. A thing without provenance. The next morning, I unpacked the painting and leaned it against the desk. Its edges were worn from years of handling. I didn't frame it. I didn't want it behind glass anymore. I took out the letters next. Clara's handwriting had always been beautiful, thin, slanted, restrained. In one, she wrote, "We don't have baby photos, but we have every moment since you arrived. Memory is more real than proof." Another read, "You were not born for me, but I believe you were meant for me." A third, more cryptic, "We didn't know how to say goodbye to the child we lost. Then you appeared." I read them again and again. I tried to imagine a woman who wrote them. Was she mourning or building a story to believe in? I stared at my own reflection in the window fragmented by frost. Did they love me? Or did they love the shape I filled in their grief? The following day, just after breakfast, I opened my email and saw his name. Silas. Subject line, "The truth hurts, but it's still truth." The message was short. Attached was a grainy scan of a document labeled Relinquishment Record. It claimed to come from a defunct adoption agency. Scribbled notes indicated that my biological parents had surrendered me due to financial hardship. Below a sentence in Silas's clipped tone, "Perhaps the Langleys didn't rescue you. Perhaps they just needed something to replace what they lost." I stared at the screen until it blurred. My chest tightened. I called Jasper, the only person I still halfway trusted. "If I'm just an antique, Jasper," I whispered, "who gets to decide how much I'm worth?" He said my name, gently, over and over. I could hear him trying not to panic, but his comfort couldn't cross the miles. I hung up before he finished his sentence. Then I stopped answering calls altogether. I ignored Fiona's voicemail, Elliot's texts. When Clara's number appeared, I blocked it. I was done collecting words from people who had withheld the only truth that mattered. That night, I sat at the small desk and began writing a letter to Theodore. I didn't know if I would ever send it. I just needed the words out of me. "You once said that if I ever became rich or famous, you'd proudly call me your daughter. But if I wasn't, if I had no gallery, no name, no talent, was I anything to you at all? A good investment, a beautiful object to polish and display." The paper trembled as I folded it. I didn't seal it. Later, I took out the oil painting again, held it in my lap. For the first time, I examined it like a stranger. The color palette was muted stormy blues and gray. The girl by the water was nearly translucent, as if she could vanish with a gust of wind. I thought of the prints Amara had given me, Elias Merrow's known works. I lined them side by side with the painting. The brushwork was the same. The texture of the clouds, the soft, indistinct edges, the same melancholy, the same silence. It wasn't a coincidence. This painting, this gift, was not bought by Theodore. It was left behind by the man they had spent years avoiding. the one who may have created me, my father. And Theodore knew. He had known all along. I held the painting tightly, my arms trembling. My voice cracked in the still room. You knew. I packed up my things before dawn. I didn't head home. I didn't call anyone. At the top of a mountain road, I stopped the car. The sky was beginning to warm with morning. I stepped out, lit a match, and watched the letter curl into ash. If I was going to rebuild myself, I would do it from the ground up. And I would start with what burned. I didn't want to go. But Jasper was persistent. He called every night, his voice soft and stubborn. Just come back once, he said. One night. Hear them out. You deserve to hear the story from someone besides Silas. So I returned to Concord. Not as a daughter, not even as a curator, just as someone ready to listen, if only to close the door for good. The meeting was held in the gallery. Langley's antiques and art had never felt colder. The chandeliers cast long shadows across the floor. Everything looked frozen in amber. Fiona stood at the center, holding a folder. Clara sat on one end of the long mahogany table. Theodore across from her. Elliot leaned against the wall. Amara was already seated, eyes lowered. Silas arrived last, as if fashionably late. When I stepped into the room, everyone quieted. I took a seat without looking at anyone. Fiona cleared her throat. She opened the folder and laid its contents on the table. These are emails between Silas and a false contact posing as an adoption representative. They were sent 6 weeks ago. The entire premise that Elias Marrow was Elowin's father was based on falsified records. We've traced the source. It was orchestrated. She turned to Amara. You confirmed that. Amara nodded. He used things I said during a conference, twisted them, built a story he wanted Theodore to believe. Clara stood slowly. Her voice was low but steady. You didn't just manipulate my husband, she said. You manipulated our grief. You turned it into leverage. Silas smirked. I asked questions. If the answers caused discomfort, perhaps you were hiding from them. Fiona didn't flinch. And yet, you pitched the sale of Langley's to an unnamed buyer the same week. Elliot moved forward and handed me a sealed envelope. This was filed years ago. We didn't think you needed it, but now you do. Inside was a legal certificate, proof of my adoption, my birth date, 1997. My parents anonymous, protected by law. No mention of Elias Marrow. I didn't cry. I just sat with it. A paper finally opened with no revelations, just confirmation that I had always belonged to a blank space. Theodore stood next. His voice was raw. I didn't want to lose you, he said. So I hid everything, even from myself. Then Silas came with a story that made too much sense. I let doubt in. Not about you, about me. Whether I had any right to be your father. I looked up. And that joke you made, was that your fear talking to? He didn't deny it. Jasper walked toward the table, holding the painting, the one I had carried with me all my life. We tested it, he said, under ultraviolet light. The signature glows faintly, Elias Marrow. But there's something else. He handed me a UV flashlight. I turned it on, directed it at the corner. Words appeared faint and glowing. For EH, may you grow where love finds you. Everyone stared. No one spoke. Theodore stepped back. Clara covered her mouth. Fiona whispered, he knew. From the beginning. I felt heat rise in my chest, not anger. Something closer to grief. Not for Elias, for all the years we might have been honest. I looked at Theodore. You didn't bring me into this world, but you kept me in it. I don't know what that makes you, but I know what it makes me. Silas stood trying to speak, but Fiona cut him off. You're done. Permanently. The community will hear everything. Clara turned away. Don't come near us again. The room fell quiet. No shouting, no apologies. I took the adoption file with me when I left. I left the painting behind, Some things need to stay in the gallery, others need to be lived. It had been nearly a month since the day I stood in the gallery and heard my father admit he had doubted, not me, but himself. I hadn't returned to Langley since. I rented a studio apartment above a bookstore in Portland, Maine. It smelled of ink and wood and solitude. 2 hours from Concord, but far enough that I could breathe without remembering everything. Each morning, I walked past the harbor, the sea breeze catching my hair, the salt tang reminding me that things moved on, even if I didn't. I wasn't there to disappear. I was there to search not for a father, but for myself in the absence of certainty. One afternoon, I visited a modest gallery that held several works by Elias Marrow. There, tucked in a quiet room near the back, was a landscape I hadn't seen before. Gray mist over a hillside, brushstrokes so familiar it made my chest ache. No note, no message this time. Just a canvas, silent. I stood before it for a long while, not to solve a mystery, but to simply exist in its presence. There was peace in not needing answers. Back in my apartment, I reopened my adoption records pages I now knew wouldn't reveal the names I once longed for. I reread every line, slowly this time, without desperation. I didn't need them to fill the hole anymore. The hole had become a garden. In my journal, I wrote, "Blood doesn't explain love, but silence can destroy it." That week, I sent an invitation, my first since everything unraveled. A handwritten note to Clara and Theodore asking if they would come for dinner. I told them there would be no expectations, just a meal. A chance. They arrived on Sunday. Clara brought a pie. Theodore, a small wooden box. He handed it to me before we sat. "I kept this from the day you came into our home," he said. "But I think it no longer belongs to me." The box was mahogany, worn smooth by time. Inside, folded letters stacked tightly like prayer scrolls, dozens of them. Letters they had written to me before I could read, before I could even speak one every week for years. A quiet ritual of love I had never known existed. One letter, written in Clara's careful hand, was dated after a fever I vaguely remembered from childhood. "If I could trade my life to keep you here, I would do it without hesitation. You may not carry my blood, but you live in my heartbeat." I cried then, not for the pain, but for the clarity. I had been loved, just not always in a language I recognized. We ate simply roasted chicken wine, warm bread. I didn't ask for more apologies. I didn't need them. At one point, Theodore looked at me steady and unflinching. "I was wrong," he said, "not for doubting the truth of your bloodline, but for letting that doubt speak louder than my love. I let it make a fool of me, of us." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for a chance to try again from here forward. I didn't speak. I just nodded. After they left, I placed the box on a shelf beside Elias Marrow's painting. 2 paths, 2 truths, 1 space. I was no longer dividing them. I was making room. The next day, I called Jasper. "I'm coming back," I said. "Not as a daughter, not as a successor, just as me." Langley's had room for that. 3 months later, Langley's Antiques and Art unveiled its most anticipated exhibit in years, titled The Uncertified Legacy. The show featured works without confirmed authorship, side by side with emerging artists charting new paths. I had contributed a piece, my first, under my own name. The girl in the fog hung in the center of the main hall, a mist-covered silhouette, half blended into the mountains of the White Range. My mountains? My fog? My choosing? I didn't make a speech. Jasper introduced the exhibit. Fiona read a statement she wrote with me weeks ago. "This is the voice of someone who once didn't know who she was. Now she chooses who she will be." I stood near the back between 2 columns, watching strangers pause before my painting. Their heads tilted. Some whispered. Some took photos. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was outside the frame. I was part of the wall, the space, the story. Theodore and Clara came. They didn't hover. They walked quietly, hands clasped. Near the close of the night, Elliot approached with a small box. Inside was a bracelet, silver simple but new. It didn't read EH this time. It read, Elowen Langley. I looked at him. He smiled. Your name doesn't matter to the world, but it matters to those of us who carry it near our hearts. Fiona pulled me aside after. She handed me a signed contract ownership papers for Langley's new Portsmouth branch. You'll lead creative direction, she said. On your terms. No legacy to uphold but your own. I blinked fast. You really trust me with that? She nodded. Because I see what you've built, not just on canvas, but out of pain. That's art. That's leadership. 2 weeks later, we drove to Cape Cod. Not for nostalgia, not for ghosts, but because I wanted to build something warm with the people I had chosen and who had chosen me back. Jasper, Fiona Elliott, and I stayed in a small house by the dunes. We ate seafood on the deck, told stories under wool blankets. At sunset, we walked the beach. My hair whipped in the wind, and for once, it didn't feel like something I had to tame. I brought one last letter, written to the people I would never meet. Thank you for bringing me into the world, but it was others who kept me in it, and that's what made me survive. I didn't burn this one. I let the sea take it. Back in Portland, I hung the oil painting Elias's in my new apartment, not because it proved anything, but because I wanted to. My choice. I founded a scholarship soon after. The Unclaimed Frame, a fund for orphaned and adopted children who wanted to make art, who didn't know where they came from, but knew they had something to say. When Jasper asked, half joking, "Are you finally ready to fall in love?" I laughed. I'm dating myself right now, I said, and I'm the most complicated person I've ever met. He raised a glass. Good luck with that. I smiled. I think I'm finally learning to live inside my own signature. And this time, no one else gets to sign for me. Sometimes the people who raise us aren't the ones who gave us life, but the ones who gave us love, even in silence. And sometimes the truth isn't what sets us free. It's what we choose to do after we hear it. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to subscribe, and stay with us for the next one. Thank you for listening.